Ladies and gentlemen, today's debate is about the role of a secular government. A government that presides over perhaps a religious community, one that may have religious roots and foundings, a government like the government of America, but in its current form is secular. And how should that government represent the religiosity that exists within its community and throughout its tradition? On side government today, we would say that they can, as an individual, has a right to express his or her religion in whatever way he or she wants to. But from a government's perspective, a government office and a government official, the official representation of the government should always be secular. And by secular, we will mean without any form of religion or religious symbol, right? So in my speech today, I'm going to explain carefully why. I'm going to first talk about the power of those religious symbols, why those symbols are different from any other kind of symbol, and the message that it sends to people. I will also talk about the role of the public office and how having that symbol dilutes the effectiveness of that public office. And of course, it's a terrible, terrible thing. My second speaker, slightly better looking version of myself, will talk about why the role of a government in a multiracial country should always be to take the highest line of secularism in whatsoever way, and finally why it's important to maintain a consistent look and feel of these public offices. Okay, it sounds like an excellent case so far, and it'll only get better. But before we move on, it's important to define very few key terms. I already talked about the type of context in which this debate happens, secular governments, and so on and so forth. But two more important things. One, what is a religious symbol? We say anything that is connected to a specific religion, so like a cross, or maybe like the Jewish candle, the Hanukkah symbol, those kinds of things. That when you look at it, you have a clear idea that that's connected to a religion. And secondly, what is a public office? We say any representation, official representation of the government, so a court, the immigration department, police department, and so on and so forth. Those things constitute public offices. No, thank you, sir. So let's move on to my argumentation, right? So why are these symbols powerful things? Okay, so we say a symbol here is not just a decoration. It's different from, say, a sports flag. It's different from a brand. A symbol has a specific connection to that religion. It's something members of that religion hold in very high regard. You don't leave a symbol on the floor, you don't dirty it, you don't say bad things at it. It's a special thing that comes in a special place, right? In some communities will go to war or people get really upset when you see them desecrating someone else's symbol. So it's not just an empty kind of sign, it has a huge powerful meaning over their followers. We say so that the symbol sends a message. The symbol isn't just decoration. The symbol is usually sends a message of connection as well. You go into a Christian person's home, you see a cross on their wall. That's an indication that that person is a Christian, right? You don't see a Muslim person having a cross. We say also the difference then here with religion is that religion has sends a message of exclusivity, not inclusivity. Okay, so it sends that this is an idea and you have to belong to part of this group. To belong to a religion, a religious organization or a group takes a very high bar. It's not something that I can choose to become today and then tomorrow choose to unbecome. And very often you're born into a religion. So at the end of, in summary then what this symbol does is it sends the message that here belongs a people who are part of a very specific group. Okay, and if you're not part of that group, then you are bound to feel a little excluded. So if I am already part of that group, then I may welcome the sign of that religious symbol. I may feel a connection to it and I feel trust. But we are worried of what happens when you don't belong to that group. And we say in these multiracial communities, there are bound to be people who don't belong to that group. And I'm going to tell you why in some situations those people are more important. Yes, sir?
Are you also going to ban people working in public offices to maybe take off their religious symbols, like taking off their rosaries, their burqas, or maybe even their crosses?
No, we don't. We don't think you are there as an individual. If you're wearing traditional or religious clothing, and that is a reflection of you as an individual, then we think that's fine, right? We don't think you should be overtly like kind of trying to push your religion on other people. And we admit this line can be a little bit tricky. So if I'm there with a huge cross and I put it on my table that it looks like an altar, then we think that's maybe overstepping the bounds a little bit. But if you have a chain and there's a cross on it, we think that's fine. If you have a ring with something on it, we think that's fine. Okay, so we think that that's not going to have the kind of impact that we think having a religious symbol on the wall of the office is going to have, and that's what we're worried about. And this brings me nicely to my second point, how this dilutes the effectiveness of a public office. So what is the role of a public office? It is to serve the public equally and accessibly as possible. And very often you go to public office as like a matter of fact. You just go there to fill a form and then you come out. But sometimes, and to some people, it can be a very stressful place, right? So if I go to a police station to file a complaint, or because a complaint has been filed against me, if I'm going to apply for an immigration visa, right, or if I'm there at court, we think those kind of situations make you feel a lot of pressure, especially if you're a minority in that community. If I'm a Muslim in a predominantly Christian environment, and I'm going there to seek for help or try to extend my visa, or I'm worried about something, and I feel even more excluded when it's there on the wall that this is a Christian establishment. Or at least that's how it portrays to me. It makes me feel less welcome in my own country as a citizen trying to get services from my government in a public office. And we think that's a dangerous thing. So as the public office, they need to serve everybody equally, and because these symbols send really powerful messages, we think that you shouldn't display those symbols in public offices. We're very happy to propose.
Mr. Speaker, today on the negative team, what we're going to prove to you is why the line between the ideologies of religious freedom is something that a religious state, even if that state is secular, is something that we must uphold for the sake of the representation of not only the majority religion of that society, but also for the minority religion at the end of the day. What we're going to prove to you, Mr. Speaker, is first of all, we're going to prove to you to what extent can the state limit the action of religious freedom. We're going to talk about the principles behind a religious and a secular state, and why under the motion today this does not uphold the similar principles. We're also going to prove to you upon why it does not harm the capability of these public offices, while additionally proving you why there are no necessary harms coming from the status quo today. And my second speaker, NC, is also going to come up to you and talk about why it actually provides, why the opportunities for these minority religions are actually going to decrease under the model of the proposition side, which is something that they wanted to uphold. But before we go into these substantive matters, let me go into several points of rebuttal towards the Prime Minister. While the Prime Minister has provided a very elaborate case, which we really enjoyed for today's debate, we want to point out some mistakes that he made within his speech today. Well, the first mistake that we want to identify, Mr. Speaker, was his concession towards the point of information that my Leader of Opposition, which is me, has provided to you in today's debate. The Prime Minister has conceded that they're not going to ban people's religious symbols within these public offices, Mr. Speaker. We have a problem that the problems that the Prime Minister has identified as things of exclusion, as things of minority religions feeling uncomfortable, we believe that those problems are not going to be mutually exclusive under the case scenario in which a person actually sees many people wearing the cross within that public office, Mr. Speaker. If that person comes to this public office and sees many people wearing that cross or wearing that rosary, we believe that these people are going to feel the same amount of uncomfortableness within that particular scenario. So we don't understand upon how this particular model is actually solving a lot of situations in which these people are simply going to wear their religious symbols. No, thank you, sir. But also upon this idea of feeling pressure, Mr. Speaker, we don't understand upon why this is such a big problem to begin with. Because the person or this Muslim who goes to this public office, the fundamental goal that he wants to go there is not necessarily to feel comfortable, but it is rather to receive the services, rather to receive his visa or receive the public services that that public office is providing. But we believe that those services are still going to be provided under today's status quo, because if they don't provide services, there are many situations such as anti-discrimination laws that can actually persecute that public office in saying that this person has discriminated me based on my religion, that I have the capabilities of utilizing the checks and balances within that liberal state, and we believe that they are very useful tools that the state can actually utilize. But additionally, if we concede to the fact that the status quo or the debate that's happening today is in a multi-religious scenario, we obviously believe that those public offices who represents the majority of the society also has multi-religious individuals, Mr. Speaker. So in that public office, it's not always going to be a scenario in where the majority of people are going to be Christians, but we also believe that if that Muslim wants to feel comfortable, there will also be a Muslim within that public office. We don't think that that's that big of a problem. Let's go into my substantive matter, which is number one, upon to what extent can the state limit the action of religious freedom, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that in a secular state, the laws should be secular, but traditions and identities should. We also believe that there's also a possibility and a chance that they can reflect the religion, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the limitations of a secular state should only be in the case scenario if they impose regulations on the activities of other religions, Mr. Speaker. But we do not think that these regulations are actually going to be problematic. Because first of all, we believe that we are always going to allow them to express their religion and gather to make sure and ensure their beliefs are going to be actualized. And secondly, we're not persecuting everyone who has a different religion, Mr. Speaker. But why is it important to express their history or express their identity, ladies and gentlemen? We believe that in these particular instances, religious identities are to some extent a historical reflection, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the very fact that the United States of America utilizes words like, oh my Lord, or oh my God, actually shows from the Pilgrims that they are actually based upon an ideology of religious persecution, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they are so passionate upon the ideas of freedom of expression. So therefore, we believe that the very idea that the majority of people feel that freedom of religion is very important, we believe that that freedom of religion should also be reflected within the public offices, ladies and gentlemen. If an individual feels that that public office should reflect that religious ideology, we believe that the majority, those public offices should also have that opportunity to show and express and have that religious symbol within that office. Before I go on, yes sir.
So you think it has the same impact when an individual is wearing a cross or there's a cross on the building?
According to the premises of the Prime Minister, then we do believe that to some extent that the religious symbols, or if that person feels uncomfortable that the majority of people are actually a different religion, then yes, we do believe that the impact could have some similar meaning. Because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily always a case scenario in which it's like a symbol on a cross or a symbol on a building that brings this impact, but it's the majority and the quantity of how much it gives pressure upon that individual if we concede, assuming but not conceding to the ideologies of what the proposition side is providing to us. So let's go upon the second idea on why it does not harm the capability of a public office. Because, Mr. Speaker, the principle that we want to provide to you in today's debate is that public offices' capability is not always based on background, ladies and gentlemen. Logan is an atheist today, but we've seen the great Logan debate in many debates representing the voices of many religious people, Mr. Speaker. The very fact that this capability is possible also within a public office environment is conceding and providing to you, ladies and gentlemen, that even if I have a different background, even if I have different cultural traits, I am still able to represent the voices of other individuals because we are still able to hear those voices and we are still able to understand and sympathize with those ideologies. The very fact that freedom of expression is premised in this particular debate allows this capability to happen, and which is the very reason why we are very proud to oppose.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, when the government is providing any service, it's not enough to say whether or not how this affects most people, or will the average person be this way, will the average person be that way. I'm the government, and the same reason why we need to ensure that there is equal access for anyone who is disabled into a building, or to ensure that every minority has that equal right, and not just make sure it is and allow a tyranny of the majority. We have to set the lowest and most accessible bar possible for everyone, right? So in that situation, we believe the burden on the government today, the one my previous better-looking first speaker presented, was that as long as some people can feel isolated and excluded, and as long as they don't get the same level of access to the government, we think that is a harm that it causes, right? And those were the 2 points largely that the first speaker of the opposition provided in his excellent response to our excellent case, which was firstly that it doesn't, he made an interesting claim on not creating any form of difference, whether if you allow an individual versus allow a building, which I will respond to, and secondly that it doesn't cause any harm whatsoever, because people can still effectively service their role. I'm going to deal with those things before I move on to my extension, which is the role of government in a multiracial country or multi-religious country. But so firstly, he had this cute, an interesting point. He said that if we allow individuals to wear symbols, and if we assume that the majority of those individuals then will be of a particular religious group, And since my previous speaker argued that symbols are powerful, then this will still have the same exclusionary effect as a building having a symbol, right? And so we end up assuming, we're not conceding in other fancy legalese that he said in his speech, we will have the same impact, and therefore our proposal has no value. We make a distinction. We say an individual wearing a symbol is that individual's choice. And that individual's choice may not necessarily be incredibly overt, right? So I'm wearing a symbol as part of my clothes. And that's something that any other individual can do too. So you can walk into that building wearing your religious symbols as well. But a building having a symbol is not a choice or representation of an individual. It's a representation of a system. It's a representation of power, of government, right? And if I'm feeling excluded already, so if I'm a minority in that system, then this further adds to my feeling of exclusion. Now, if I walk into a room full of people who are dressed religiously different from me, will that also affect me? Yes, it probably will affect me. And in that situation, what I don't also need is a cross behind the building, because that will further add to whatever oppression I'm feeling, but it's also different because it's not about that individual. So I can't choose another individual. Say I would like to speak to a Muslim individual, or I come back another day or find someone, but the building is, and that impacts how everybody there is supposed to be represented. And therefore we say there is a clear difference between an individual wearing a symbol and a building wearing a symbol, Mr. Speaker. But secondly, so moving on then to the second point of does this then cause any harm? We say yes, well, it sends out this message that people feel excluded. But in response to that, he said a couple of things. He said, look, it doesn't impact people who go in there just to get their service. And secondly, he said, people can distinguish that. They can separate their role, their beliefs, and how they function and do their jobs. Okay? So in the second thing first, we say we don't think people are going to discriminate, and that's not the point that we are making. We think the perception that it gives the other people is that they are discriminated against. So we accept that people will still do their jobs as they do their jobs, but this is about how other people perceive them, right? And that's why, you dress professionally when you work in a government office, even though we know that if you're wearing shorts, you're still going to process things effectively. You still need to seem professional in order to give that perception, right? But he says it doesn't impact people, because if you go to immigration office, you're just there to fill a form. That's different. So that's subjective. We think it impacts people who feel more excluded. It gives you a certain amount of stress. So if I'm going to file a claim, and I'm feeling worried if I'm a small guy running a business and I'm struggling with that, and I feel that as a minority in the country, I don't get a fair deal, that people are set against me, that everyone's picking on me, that I don't have equal access, my English is not so good. With all these things, it adds up, and I feel even more oppressed and excluded with those symbols. And we think that's the problem, right? So it doesn't have to impact everybody the same way, but if we can impact some of the citizens, we think that's a bad thing. Yes, sir?
If you just consider that there are many factors that can impact a person regarding stress, such as their language, such as their cultural heritage, what excludes religion compared to all of those other things that could seem just as equal regarding stress and discrimination?
Sure, because that's a point my excellent first speaker made, which was that religion tends to be a lot more exclusive compared to other things. So I can learn a language. Yeah, I learn to speak Spanish or Arabic doesn't mean I become Muslim or change my religion. But for me to opt into another religion requires a significant amount of change, right? So we think that's the huge problem, which then moves us nicely into the extension point, which I already touched on a little bit. And what should the role of government be in a multiracial country? We think the bar that those governments have to set is the one that is the most accessible possible. No citizen should feel less welcome compared to any other citizen in your house. And the government is my house, because we all contribute equally to the foundation, to the setup, to the maintenance of the government. As a minority, I still pay the same amount of tax. I still face the same amount of responsibility as anybody else in that country. And therefore, I should feel just as welcome as anyone else. And we say, language or individuals within the building aside, that government shouldn't take a position or shouldn't be seen to take a position. And we think that's the danger with a symbol. Why? Because symbols serve a very specific purpose, and religion is a lot more exclusive compared to anything else. and therefore the government cannot be seen to perceive or to take that side. We're very happy to stand on the side of justice, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, this debate is about the countries where it has different religious ideology exists, right? So this debate should be about, in the long term, how we can make our state more open to the peoples. How can we make our state more, inclusive state rather than an exclusive state, right? That is why team government solutions of offended religious ideas is not right from the start, right? We think that we must disclose everybody the differences, and we must solve the problems when people cannot accept other people's differences, rather than we are forcing certain groups their identity, and you shouldn't disclose your identity in the public, because at the end of the day, unlike team government portrayed in today's debate, those persons who want to see their symbol in the public places is going to be offended too. That is going to be my argument, how that is going to have further discrimination to the small minority religious groups. With that, I have two questions in today's debate, right? First question, how we can make, how we can define the secular state, and what is the right definition of the secular state. The second question is going to be about why government policy make more discrimination to the small religious, minority group. The first questions, right? What is the right definition of secular state, right? We think that secular state cannot be 100% neutral for the religious, right? I don't think there is anything about 100% neutral, right? That is why my first speaker clearly gave you the standard. If state make law and then that legislation said you can't, exercise your religious ceremony or religious activity, and we don't want it, right? Because physically we limit, other citizens' religious right. But the thing is, we can express their religious symbols to the public places. Why? Because when citizens claim something, is banned, their religious right and religious freedom, that must have a clear standard, like physical restrictions, right? But if people is going to talk about subjective restrictions, I don't think they can be 100% right standard. Why? Because perception is very subjective, right? You can't say, because I am offended, you cannot, apply to everybody who is going to the public place. That is why this cannot be a good reason to get rid of something. That is why it cannot be a good reason to get rid of some symbols which has a good meaning to the society, right? He said that some people is going to feel unwelcomed, right? I think this is very subjective. If I am from the South and my grandfather was dead because of a war which was caused by Lincoln, then I was very offensive. I saw the Lincoln's picture in the house, right? The only difference is coming from team government. The religion is very exclusive, right? But a lot of things can be exclusive. Like I said before, like the pictures of the Lincoln, right? That is why this can't be a reason to get rid of symbols to the public space. Then he said, some people feeling I am very, discriminated by the public office, right? But like I said before, this is your feeling. More than that, we think that this is the things we should not change. We should change, right? Just because you see other people's symbol, I am very offended. That is why I cannot go there. That's the problem we must solve, rather than people disclose their identity to the public. Because we should see this state in the long term, right? We must make state more accept other people who are more tolerant to other people's differences. Yes.
But if a building if the government is investing in those symbols, aren't they also promoting a particular religious choice over another religious choice?
No, I don't think that is true. Because just because you see the certain symbols, that doesn't mean you must change your religious belief. If that is the case, I don't think your religious belief is so ingrained your idea. That is why it is not going to be that problems, right? Let's move on to my second questions. Why government policy harms the religious minority groups more? Because like team government belief, religious is the big things to the individuals, right? To me, it wasn't, it is not the big things, but to some of the people, it's going to be a big thing. But suddenly, one day, government is going to get rid of all the religious symbols from the public offices. Then these people is going to think, my religious freedom and my religious symbols should be get rid of because of small minority religious group, even if that is not true, right? Because these people trying to find a scapegoat and they will blame and criticize the small minority religious group. Why this is the problem, Mr. Speaker? Because in the liberal democratic society, when you can make certain law and legislation based on the majority rules, a lot of people is offended by other small groups. There's a more possibility these people can make legislation which discriminate the small groups. We think this is the problem. More than that, if I have a problems with certain groups, I'm not going to be tolerant. I'm not going to be very open to these people. We think this is the problem. Mr. Speaker, this debate should be judged on long-term development of the country. I think our policy have a better country rather than team government. So we oppose.
Alright guys, welcome back. Now since you have finished watching the debate, you must do a couple of things in order for your teacher to be very, very happy. Alright, so first of all, what you should be doing is you should be providing on a piece of paper and comparing the contributions that both the government side and the opposition side has provided you today. As in providing the contributions not necessarily in the specific examples, but actually following what the speakers have been talking about and actually seeing specifically on the logic and the reasoning behind their arguments. Once you have identified those contributions, you should compare those contributions in the forms of clashes. It doesn't necessarily always have to be clashes, but it should necessarily be important issues that you felt were necessary in assessing today's debate. So for those individuals who might be confused on what today's clashes or issues might be, let me give you an example. One of the important issues that I thought were crucial in today's debate was upon whether religious symbols actually bring discomfort to religious minorities. So in comparing these clashes, government side provided that these big religious symbols actually brought discomfort to minorities because since the majority of that country's religion is to a majority religion, that's the reason why maybe minorities feel discomfort when they're going for public services. And on the other hand, the opposition side tried to negate those harms by providing you many examples of why there could be comfort or examples upon why an individual could go against such harms done upon an individual and why that is more than enough to suffice the needs of these minorities. So compare these examples, come up with your own important issues, and we'll see you in class.